Hello, and welcome to Painting with Stephen, episode 18. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're watching this, and let's get right into it. So, if you're a regular on this channel, you'll see that I've toned my canvas a different colour for this episode, and the reason that I've done that is because, well, the reason I've done that is because there was leftover paint on my canvas from my previous episode 17, and so I mushed it all together to make a sort of a greeny brown umber colour, and then toned my canvas with that instead. Realistically, see, as long as it's a sort of earthy, neutral-ish colour, I don't really care what colour the canvas is. Umber is great, and I use umber intentionally, but this sort of dark umberish green I think also is very, very beautiful. Works really, really well to give paintings a very moody, earthy feeling. And actually this ended up being very, very useful for me because essentially I almost had to do very little covering work for my earth colours, like, for my grass and for my, sort of like dark, moody, sort of European landscape colours are, if you've watched this channel before, my episode Haunted Highlands, Shattered Redoubts, my previous episodes, all of these where you're utilising these sort of dark greens and browns to create this almost moorland type landscape. Umber layers work, this also works. I mean, the thing is that actually a lot of people intentionally go in for a sort of greenish backdrop instead of an umber backdrop, especially in tonalism. Obviously umber is king, and umber is very much a tonalist way of painting, but and we've talked about on this channel before, some people go in wet on wet with umber. Some people, obviously like me, wait until the umber layer is dry and let it shine through as a layer. But there's also other tonalist painters out there that certainly ones that did the whole sort of art demonstration real-time thing, like Dennis Sheenan. He was sort of very tonalisty in his approach with his very earthy colours, and he sort of used a greenish backdrop in a way. I've also seen a guy called Stuart Davis. He sort of does something similar. I think he mixes like green and umber as his beginning layer, and again paints wet on wet. Obviously this is a very different painting to anything these guys are painting. But yeah, my point is that realistically, see, if you have spare paint on your canvas and you just mix a whole bunch of colours up, actually a lot of the time it will produce something really good as a neutral tone, because most colours when they mix turn to brown, or at least brownish. So, hey. Anyway, let's get into what I'm actually painting. If you watched my previous episode 17, I put that out quite late, and then I was debating, in real time in episode 17, in a section of it, whether I was going to put this painting out. I was going to try and make it for, this week, and try and get another painting out in the same week. Hopefully, if you're watching this, I've succeeded. I don't know whether I'm going to post early Monday morning or whether it's going to get out on Sunday. I hope Sunday, to keep to my promise of one painting a week. But yeah, basically this, I really, really wanted this to be a sort of cross between a really moody, dark, sort of symbolisty, Dreich type landscape on one hand, obviously with a very fantasy theme, but also a very sort of just a European heritage, European paganism theme with the cairn, which obviously fascinated symbolist painters anyway. But I didn't want it to just be a sort of symbolisty scene or even tonalisty scene. I wanted to bring a certain aspect of ethereality to this one. I wanted to bring some of my old oil painting techniques in. I wanted it to be a mixed medium instead of just acrylic. And so I essentially wanted this to almost be like a fantasy dreamscape, so tying in with the sort of tonalist idea, of having these almost still, creepy scenes. But I wanted to bring a level of ethereality into it, with the sky, which I always intended to be oil. This was one of my favourite sort of skies to do back when I was strictly an oil painter. Obviously now I paint mostly in acrylic with all of my detail work. But this sky is something that I always love doing, although it's a while away yet before we do the sky. But I wanted to incorporate a waterfall in here. I wanted to incorporate the cairn, the chambered cairn, but I don't really want this to just be a cairn, okay? Most cairns are chambered cairns, and actually, funnily enough, this is actually quite a fascinating thing, coincidence perhaps. The day that I started this work, this painting, I actually went to see the solstice at Cairn Holy, a place in Galloway, which allegedly was the tomb of Galdus. Galdus is a mythical Scottish king, almost like a King Arthur figure in Scottish mythology. There's a very interesting group of people that you always find there, that will tell you about, the intricacies of, the stone positionings, how it correlates with, the movement of the sun, the moon. But me and my girlfriend woke up at 2 a.m, headed down there, to catch the solstice and to just take in the atmosphere of these incredible cairns. And then, funnily enough, although I actually had this pre-planned and I wanted to do a cairn painting for a while, I went on to paint this fantasy cairn scene. Although the cairn, it's not the focal point of the painting per se, but it sort of is. I wanted it to be off the side of a waterfall, because I just love also the ethereality that a waterfall gives you. Waterfalls do something for my imagination, and cairns also do something that just that harkening back to our primeval past, our societies that whose morals and beliefs have now disappeared and have become obscured from our understanding. These fascinate me immensely and really get my imagination going. But I didn't want this to just be a cairn. I wanted almost the cairn to be a passageway into almost a dungeon, like a vault, very old fantasy style. Who knows how deep it goes, whether it goes all the way through this landscape into those mountains there, or whether, there's like a weird hidden exit where the waterfall is, or who knows what's going on. I wanted this cairn to have the aesthetic of a chambered cairn, and it certainly is a burial place of a I don't want to say Neolithic, maybe slightly after Neolithic warrior. But of course, it's all fantasy, it's made up. But you know, I wanted it to represent a primeval European setting, but I wanted it to also be more strictly fantasy, which is why I incorporated the sky that I did. Now, as you can see, now this is a sort of interesting point. Going back to what we were just talking about 5 minutes ago with the usage of green, okay, as an underlayer, or at least a subdued, muted umber green, that can actually be very effective for moody skies. And if I was painting a moody, maybe tonalist or verging on symbolist painting here, I probably would have kept the green in and just utilised it as the underlayer for my sky, and then painted over all of these details, you know, probably with umber clouds and maybe a hazy sun, you know what I'm talking about, or maybe some pinks, some very, very laid back muted pinks. Didn't do that. Reason I didn't do that was because I wanted this to be more again, like dreamlike. So I didn't want this sort of innately moody and subdued colour to be in my sky. I wanted it to be black, truly black as a backdrop for my subsequent oil layer to be applied. And I've shown this on the channel before. This is a very quick, effective, easy sky to do, which is also, I think, got a little bit of wow factor, or you know, certainly draws people in to a scene. And also, just for me, you know, I don't give a shit really, to be honest with you, if it draws anyone into the scene or not. In a way, the reason I love to paint these skies is because I just adore the atmosphere that it creates. I absolutely I love the colours. The colours for me instantly send me into a dreamlike state, an imaginative state that you know, makes me think of you know, these distant kingdoms and you know, warriors of the ancient past, and ruins and castles, and you know, like rolling European landscapes, and just all these incredible things. It is like you've walked into a dream. That's why I like these cosmic sort of skies, and that's why I love to do them. And really with oils especially, because oils just have that lushness to the colour, that saturation that you really can use very effectively here. So my idea here was paint some acrylic ivory black, let it dry, then a day later go in with my oil layers. That's the plan for the sky. As you can see, I've got my fine detail brushes so that I can go over you know, and get into the little crevices you know, between my mountain. We're dealing with a pretty small canvas here, in contrast to what came before in episode 17, which was a 50 by 60 and very tiring work. As you can see, this canvas is a lot smaller. I decided to go with a smaller canvas, both because one, it would lend itself to this composition, and two, because I was tired from episode 17 because it took me so long. So I wanted to do a small canvas to get it out quicker, and to, you know, bring it out to you guys on YouTube, and you know, not to be held back with time as much. And I really thought that this composition would just shine on a small canvas instead of a giant 50 by 60 or something like that. So yeah, it's really good fun to sometimes go into a small canvas, because small canvases allow you to just really get things on there, get things out, play around with compositional ideas while not wasting too much time. If you dedicate yourself to a composition on a 50 by 60, you're there, and as soon as you start it, there's no going back. You're there for ages, and you have to see it through, obviously, unless it's innately flawed, in which case you have to go back to the drawing board and do it again. Whereas with something like this, you can try maybe new things, you can experiment with composition of details, with techniques, with colours. And because it's a small canvas, it doesn't matter too much, although obviously every painting, you want to strive to do your best. And I wanted to, obviously, although it's a small canvas, I want to pack a lot of detail onto that small canvas. Knife work is good for that. If you've watched this channel before, I'm a big fan of knife work, just to get those little details in very quickly. I did knife work for the cairn itself, which you can see is looking ominous to the right hand side there, and the mountains and the rocks that are covering this water, which is going to be our waterfall. Now, I mentioned this on episode 17. I've mentioned this also on my Haunted Highlands episode. I think that was episode 12, although I really can't remember. When you're painting waterfalls, depending on set and setting, so obviously if you're doing like more of a sort of Scottish Highlands scene or like moors, you want to tend to actually paint your water a brown colour and then highlight it with a white. But in a scene like this, greys, browny umbery greys work equally well. Excuse me. So I think people, again, we've talked about a lot on this channel in the past about schemas of the mind, holding yourself back from painting, with accurate colours, because essentially, for example, people will think a tree needs to be brown and green, and grass needs to be green, and water needs to be blue. But realistically, actually, when you look at most waterfalls, when do you ever see blue? You don't, because the water's churning up and creating all of this foam and these bubbles, and so it looks more grey. Especially in a night scene like this, it's going to look more sort of subdued grey with little white highlights. So that's what we're doing. It's just a little sort of piece of advice in a way, because I think that's something that trips a lot of beginner painters up, is this idea that almost going with this idea of a thing instead of sort of actually analysing what the thing would really look like. Just instantly jumping to the conclusion that water would be blue, and then trying to paint it into a scene and it just not really working that well. It's a tough thing to get your head around, I think, especially for a lot of beginner artists, but everybody does get there in their own way, I think, where they start to realise, actually, hold on, I can use colour in a way a lot more creatively than I once thought I could. And actually, most things are verging on, especially with landscape painting, verging on very muddy, dirtied, subdued colour. Lots of umber, lots of browns, lots of greys, lots of very held back colour. Although, of course, especially when you're painting in a sort of tonalistic way, or any of these sort of styles where mood is an atmosphere are really the prime purpose of the painting. A lot of the time, dark sets and settings are really the mainstay. So in that case, yeah, absolutely, even more subdued colour is called for, really. Obviously a lot of painters paint more like, you know, nice country meadows and stuff like that, in which case, you know, maybe some more saturation would be called for. But with scenes like this, actually, you know, most colours you're utilising are very, very subdued, you know, like very, very unsaturated, very held back, and it will also create a nice contrast with the sky in this case, which gives it a nice fantasy setting. So it takes away, you know, back from the sort of held back drabness and the darkness and creepiness of the tonalist landscape, and then brings you back into a more almost dreamlike, surrealist, ethereal type place. And I know that I overuse the word ethereal in pretty much all of my videos, because I suppose that's because that's the sort of scenes I really want to paint and like to paint, is these you know, places where you can put yourself in that just have this power, that are usually in these sort of fantasy worlds, and just have these atmospheres that you can feel are tangible. I like to paint things with where I would want to sort of stumble upon, you know, like as an adventurer, or in some weird like other world, you know. I know this. Sorry, none of this probably makes any sense, but you know, I think that's really one of the main joys of landscape painting, is that you can just create these little worlds that then you can put yourself in, and the viewer can put themselves in, and it really gets the imagination going. And I think that's where I get so much enjoyment out of landscape painting, as opposed to, say, a portraiture or anything like that. You know, but I've really only ever been interested in painting landscapes, just for that reason. As you can see, more knife work there, just bringing in all these little details with the knife, trying to get these rocks for the waterfall. But what I think is really interesting as well, we've talked about this on this channel before, I believe I brought this up on Tomb for the Defamed Philosopher episodes. I think that might have been 2 episodes ago. A lot of the time what you want to do is, knife work can actually be very useful and beneficial, especially in this setting where you're using desaturated colour, to almost bring detail in just with texture. So instead of using like colour techniques to bring in 3-dimensionality, a lot of the time you can actually use knife techniques to make the paint you know, look different depending on the way that light hits. That just adds this real sort of intrigue to the piece, and makes everything sort of look interesting and jagged and rocky. And I think that's a really interesting way to play around, especially if you're using lots of subdued colour. Texture can actually do so much of the work for you, which is really, I think, almost a good way of protecting yourself from adding in too much detail in places where you don't want detail. You want the viewer's eye to focus on other things. Adding in just sort of very subdued colour that doesn't necessarily almost give 3-dimensional sort of 3-dimensional shape to your compositions, but it does give the texture of three-dimensionality because of how the light hits it in real life. So it gives the impression of rocks when rocks aren't really there, or you've not painted in using, you know, a middle layer, you know, a middle tone with highlights and shadow colors to paint in your rocks, because obviously that's if you were to do it conventionally, you know, thinking about your principles of three-dimensional color, you would probably go in with a mid-tone grey and then have a slightly darker variation of that and a slightly lighter variation of that to make a highlight side and a you know, dark shadow side to bring three-dimensionality to your mid-tone, which then makes it appear as a three-dimensional shape. But a lot of the time texture can also bring that three-dimensionality in. Obviously you should be playing around with both. I mean, even when you're using texture, you should be aware that colour is the number one factor of three-dimensionality and what makes things look three-dimensional. There's no getting around that. But be that as it may, it's still a really cool technique to use when you don't actually have a lot of colour at your disposal because you are holding yourself back with a subdued palette. So it's just something to keep in mind. One thing I will say is see what I'm doing right now, where I'm adding in all these tiny little dashes of like umbers and slightly darker greys and slightly lighter greys to make almost like a pebble effect. This is something that I did that was very similar with my Fingal's Cave painting to make it look like a sort of you know, the really interesting rock formations you get in the Giant's Causeway in Fingal's Cave, where it's like you know, layers of those hexagon shapes and pillars, big rock pillars. It was almost a similar technique to that, except I wanted to sort of try and get the indication of pebbles in. But as you can see now, I'm going in with my knife and I'm just sort of putting in these grey shapes with my knife, again just to create these sort of impressions of big jaggy rocks swooping down, and then blending it in with the greens and the umbers of the ground to make it look like it's sort of all part of the ground. And I think also, like, if you look at the mist coming up from the waterfall, one of the reasons why that works so effectively is because of the darks behind it. So again, that's using colour to create that three-dimensionality. This is the start of the oil layer. So I'm putting in phthalo green, permanent purple, and Prussian blue. Usually I use phthalo blue for a lighter effect, but I wanted the blue to be slightly more subdued this time. Prussian blue tends to be a bit more subdued than phthalo, so I use Prussian blue at the top. And I'm just putting in obviously these three colours right now without anything whatsoever, without any lights, any whites, and then I'm going in with pure titanium white. And again, the reason I'm using titanium is because it's more saturated than flake white hue. And I'm going in with titanium white and I'm blending all of that onto the canvas with a fan brush. Now, we've talked about this on this channel many times before. One of the main advantages or disadvantages, depending on how you look at it, of oil paint is that it stays wet for ages. You can do some incredibly cool things with the fact that oil paint stays wet for ages. One of those things is blending wet onto the canvas. However, as we've discussed, that can also be a massive disadvantage, and if you're doing detail work a lot of the time, this is why I use acrylics, because they dry so fast, and so you can add layers so quickly that then give tons of detail to your work. Now, as you can see, Here we go. So, I added in stars by watering down titanium white with a solvent and then flicking it on with my fan brush. I love doing that for quick stars, but as you can see, it's gone all over the canvas, right? All over my acrylic layer, which can be stressful, right? But you have to just, this is why I kept this in, or obviously I keep all my mistake, warts and all. You have to stay calm in moments like this, right? I didn't, by the way. I went, oh, fuck, and then sort of panicked a little bit. But what you have to do is you have to just be calm and go, right, okay, how are we going to resolve this? So I ended up getting, a cotton bud, and taking pure solvent and rubbing out all the little white marks that were caused, and then because all of my acrylic layer was dry, I could just wipe it down with a cloth, and it seemed to just do the trick. And so got rid of all the little white marks, and then left obviously the stars in the sky in my oil layer, so it's all good. Now if this was oil paint, and this just goes to show exactly what I'm talking about, if I had done all my detail work in oils here, and I'd done it a la prima, I would have been pretty screwed, to put it bluntly, because, or at least it would have been quite challenging, because you would have then had to have gone in and, sort of tried to, it would have ended up being sloppy, because you would have had to have gone in and basically interrupted a wet layer to try and get all those little white specks off. And I've been there before, trust me, I've done that. But yeah, here's the end result. You can see the dolmen on the right and the waterfall, but it's not the best quality picture because the canvas is so small. So it's a tiny little bit blurry when blown up, but yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with how this painting turned out for such a small canvas. I think it's achieved what I wanted it to achieve. I can imagine questing there, or like stumbling upon this cairn in an adventure in some fantasy land, and like this sort of almost aurora borealis sky, northern light sky, mixed with this sort of cosmic feel to it. I'm happy with it. So yeah, I think for just a nice little canvas, it was worth doing, and it was good fun to paint, and it means that I can actually get 2 episodes out this week, obviously keeping to my promise of 1 a week because the other one was late. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.